And I guess we're recording for YouTube. So yeah, we're back to it. Me and James. Only this time we're going to talk about Maps of Meaning. It's a book that I read quite a while back. I want to say sometime 2 years ago, actually. And you just recently finished it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I finished it a few weeks ago. It's kind of some of it's not all there as far as like sticking, but I also like it is really insightful, especially with the hostile brothers, because that really kind of resounds with me right now. Some of the mythic structures I thought was interesting, and then I know in an earlier conversation we were talking about the relationship between John Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson, and I hadn't finished the book then, and now that I finished it, I can confidently say like they're kind of one and the same. Just like I got the same impressions, the same ideas, from slightly different ends, and both books going, or both programs going in different directions, but they are talking about a lot of the same things. Like
Yeah, it's kind of like they intertwine here and there. Because I think Jordan, like I said, when I read Maps of Meaning, I had to stop and go and read Jung's Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, and then go back to Maps of Meaning to have a better understanding of that. And it's kind of interesting that you bring up the hostile brothers, because one of the patients at Central State that my friend Lizzie, who I had on the podcast recently, that she's been working with, kind of has, there's kind of this denial of the hostile brother archetype within, with what's going on with this person, for lack of better words, is a family annihilator, is diagnosed with schizophrenia. It's very chronic and severe. And dude's hyper religious. And so to him, I didn't do this thing. It was the demon that possessed me did this thing. So it's almost a complete denial of one's capability of doing terrible, murderous things. And so that it's almost like the Cain and Abel archetype is being denied in that clinical sense. And you're saying that so what is it about the hostile brothers, or at least the Cain and Abel archetype, or Thor and Loki for as another example? What is it? What's really sticking out with you with that you're grappling with, or that shines out for you on that? We can kind of talk about that.
It was talking about, like, in there was talking about the hero myth, and a lot of it, like the state of being, was kind of state of, like the state was addressed, and the hero. So like they're in there, you have that conversation, and why it's resounding so much with me right now. And again, I can't remember all the details, I just kind of remember some of it, is how we look at the Enlightenment and Romanticism are kind of linked that way. I think is kind of where there's something resounding there associated with emotion and rationality, for example, egalitarian type of wanting to go back into the past, or progress forward with rational thinking, or something like that, enlightening oneself. And there's just an interesting mix in there. And of course we see it too in our daily, in our discourse with in the political spheres as well. So that's kind of where I stand with it right now. Did I answer the question? I think I rambled pretty effectively.
No, let me see if I can try to see if I can kind of neatly reflect back to you what I think you're saying. Yeah. That you're talking about, it addresses the state and the hero is the one that mediates the territory, which is the state. As such, the state works, versus as in the state is corrupt and doesn't work, and it's up to the individual hero to keep the state on the track of being not corrupt and functioning properly.
Yeah,
and it takes some rational thinking and critical thinking. And that's probably where we're seeing in today's discourse, where we're trying to make sense of things to keep the state on the track of not falling into corruption and tyranny. It's very difficult to do, and you have to be very courageous and hero-like to do that, because you're questioning things that people are going to be hypercritical of you for questioning.
Mm-hmm.
And this stumbling forward into the unknown to make it known, that process that we're doing, that there is an enlightening element to that, right? That's the enlightenment idea of illuminating the darkness, making that which is not known and known well enough. And the romantic idea to that is that that's the way that human beings have managed to progress and move forward. But it seems like there's something going on in today's discourse that's stopping the unknown and the known territory. There's like a barrier between stepping out into the unknown and making it known, and then using that knowledge to further progress forward in that. No matter what it is we're talking about, it could be the state of economic policy, the state of even like, well, a good example is the Joe Rogan thing with, trying to parse out fact from fiction when it comes to like the ivermectin thing, CNN blatantly lying about it and doubling down on that. And it's like how and yet like that Gupta guy is kind of like the hero there, has taken this one point of view, but is challenged by someone else. So that adversarial warring brothers archetype played itself out between Joe Rogan and Dr. Gupta, because there's a bit of a conflict on the truth of the ivermectin thing. And, where Gupta is ideologically placed on one side, you have Joe Rogan kind of placed on this other side, calling out that's like, hey, you guys are willingly lying here. You're lying. And that's kind of dangerous. And I think there's some misrepresentation there, because Gupta thinks that Rogan is bothered by the accusation of taking horse dewormer, but Rogan's saying it's not me. It should bother you because you are a source of news. You're a source of enlightenment. You're a source of information that takes the unknown and makes it known. Mm-hmm. And if it's corrupt, then what is it that we're supposed to know that we really don't know? So it's almost like it's almost like the darkness is enveloping the light in that sense, because it's like taking so much question of the known that it becomes unknown. So you have to try to navigate that again.
And then I think that kind of deals with as well, like I think there's a few different ways we can see this one. One is the way we have the hero myth, right? Outside of a brother, right? The hero goes out into the world and it encounters the unknown, right? And it brings that, and then everyone's sphere of understanding increases, right? Yeah. So there's that. Then we have, I think, and maybe I don't understand this, but like we see two brothers, but both see a different enemy, right? And so now the question becomes, whose facts matter more, or whose whatever matters more in this bout between the two? Because you can see that the heroes, like, say that Dr. Gupta, I don't want to say it right. He represents the CNN, world, while Joe Rogan, who represents, his world. And they're manifested, yes, are the brothers from America. We can go that way, but so on and so forth. Then they sit here and they start fighting. Fundamentally, they're coming blow to blow. So yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Good. Overall,
because that we have to try to understand the conceptual landscape and how it touches upon the narrative world today. Because I actually found myself in a bit of this discussion on truth, and how it's more difficult to even define truth today than say maybe it would have been 20 or 30 years ago. Because I'm of this opinion that there is no your truth or my truth. There's just the truth, and then there's our opinions on that. And everybody wants to bring it. Well, subject experience, that's how you experience that might be true, and how somebody else's subjective experience of something might also be true. And therefore there are the two truths. But I would say, okay, well, here's an example. We can look at a car accident and we could say that, well, two cars collided. There was a red car and a blue car were involved. Now you might interpret this phenomena as the red car is at fault. And let's say I would look at it and interpret the blue car to be at fault. But the objective truth, or the truth, is that there is a car accident that involved a red car or a blue car. The rest of it is just interpretations. And that's actually part of the postmodern problem of, multiple interpretations for a single. There are multiple interpretations for any number of phenomena. That's just one phenomenon with multiple interpretations of that.
Especially with law as well, because, then you can have at least a dichotomous relationship.
Exactly. Which is also that Warring Brothers archetype playing itself out, because there's two different interpretations of the same phenomena.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So, and then when that starts happening, it gets harder and harder to actually decipher what is, and I think this is appropriate, relevant information to solve a problem.
Yes, and that goes to where you were talking about, where Peterson and Vervaeke's work kind of overlap, especially in context of maps of meaning, because relevance. You mentioned that before, especially in our last conversation where we talked about Vervaeke and Peterson and the similarities and differences maybe in between the two. And Vervaeke's thing is, what's relevant? Where's the relevance here? Because that's actually more important than just all of the other, as he would say, bullshit around that.
Yeah. And it's because of that, right? We have infinite number of propositions, right? And then because we all have heuristics and biases and all that other fun stuff, we narrow those relevant. We really narrow the field to what we think is relevant, right? To this idea, we'll call it, playground X, that has all the different things that we want to have a fun time with. But then eventually, there's other people in the playground that have different heuristics, different perspectives, something like that. And there could be someone who's completely in a dichotomous proposition set, right? And which one of those matters in solving a problem? And the thing is, oddly enough, we could probably solve some problems, right? And I want to be very careful, because people could take this either a whole bunch of different ways.
Okay.
You can solve a certain set of problems because what you're effectively doing is you're organizing into a system, right? And so you have those things, but you will never be able to solve all the problems. So we have differing degrees of success and definitions of what success is. And that creates issues, because where you have, the liberal minded versus the conservative minded, and what's sacred, open, all the other fun things, right? Tradition over non-tradition. Those things come into play where different propositions matter. And that's important to contend with.
Yeah. Because, so okay. So
not as controversial, but I mean, what you could do with that statement, right? And this is the controversial statement. I think both of us could agree on that. Whether or not we detest the Soviet Union or not, or communism, socialism, capitalism, doesn't matter. Those systems that you design have a specific outcome. They're a system that is designed that will have an outcome for a certain particular set of people that fit in that system well, regardless of their class. It doesn't matter, right? Because you have to create a system, and what you're looking for is a system that can create the most benefit. However, there will always be people that fall outside of that, and those people fundamentally are the individuals of that system.
Yeah, and this is why the individual matters, right? Because if you pretend, if you come at it that the individual doesn't matter, just whoever, whatever group or tribe or whatever you want to pull it, that person belongs to, let's say, you make it that most important, depending on depending on this. Oh God. Okay. Have to be very, very careful here. Depending on the system and who sets the system up, usually that's where you start to see the outcomes tend to favor certain groups, depending on who sets up the system. So, for example, Lenin and his vanguard of Bolsheviks, right? They're the ones that came in with the coup in October of 1917, set in with the revolution, right? And automatically they set about, okay, this is what we want to do, and this is how we're going to do this. And the presupposition is that everybody's on the same page with this, right? That's the underlying proposition, is that everybody's going to be on the same page with everybody here. But what happened is that everybody was out for themselves and for the people within their own circle. So that caused a lot of consternation and a lot of problems. Because, okay, for example, Trotsky, who is considered the patron saint of the Bolsheviks, right? He's the one that's the least murderous of the three between Lenin and Stalin. I mean, let's be honest about this. Everybody
I got you.
Thinks Trotsky was like a goddamn angel out of all three of them, but no, all three of them had blood on their hands, essentially. Trotsky thought, okay, well, if we're going to have a military that's going to be backing us up, the Red Army, the Red Guard, whatever you want to call them, well, we need competence and we need discipline and we need these things for this to work. Because Trotsky was at least sensible enough. God, I hate saying that, but you have to tell the truth. At least Trotsky was sensible enough to say, okay, well, we need a lot of the old commanders and a lot of the old military personnel who can instill the discipline that's needed if we're going to win the bloody revolution. We can't just subsist on the classes, because if we get some people into a military system that don't know how to act within a military system, then the whole damn thing is just it's not going to end well for anybody that's trying to impose this system.
Yeah, that's kind of the point.
Stalin, on the other hand, was very much against what he called the old czarist officers and commanders and all of them being part of the Red Army. And so when Stalin was in what used to be called Tsaritsyn, I think is what it was called, he had like a bunch of people just shot, murdered a whole bunch ordered the execution of a bunch of different people from all different ranks within. Well, you set out the propositions and you let them play themselves out, and Trotsky's strategy worked. And this is why Lenin went to the links that he did in the Politburo and the Comintern and all of these different congresses, that he would defend Trotsky's propositions because they actually worked. Of course, they all were concerned about having these holdovers from the old imperial czar system, because they thought they would become anti-Bolshevik and put the whole damn revolution at risk. So it seems like they were all paranoid. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that proves that they were all paranoid. And with good reason, because that system was set up for, absolute greed, envy, corruption, and betrayal was kind of like that's the underlying algorithm. That's the underlying program. Okay. And so, like you said, it doesn't matter what system you set up. Each system is going to have an outcome because it has to be set up by somebody. And so the system that seems to work the best is the one that takes individuals into account over groups, because at least in what they consider a free system, doesn't matter like who you are as an individual. We've set it up to where there's all these different, okay, you have the meta system. And you have nested inside that all these other systems, and nested inside of those systems are other systems. So there's all these different, we can call them, competence or dominance hierarchies, if we want to, since we're talking maps of meaning here, if we want to take Peterson's ideas of the dominance hierarchy, well, there's so many different hierarchies nested inside other hierarchies that are nested inside of other hierarchies that are nested inside a hierarchy. So if you are at the bottom of one, you can just hop over to the next one and see where you go. And if that doesn't work out for you, you can leave and go into a different hierarchy and see where you go. And eventually you'll find the one that your individual attributes and talents will work for, to where you'll climb up the hierarchy within that nested system. And if you're lucky, you'll transcend the one hierarchy into the next, to the next, and so on and so forth. So you're not stuck in one damned hierarchy. Whereas, like, say in systems where, okay, they're going to do, it's the Soviet Union mouse. China did the same with the command economies, where it's like, well, we're going to put you in a certain hierarchy. And if you don't do very well, then we don't have any use for you. Mm-hmm. And of course, the consequences of that is, well, if you get a bunch of incompetent people in one hierarchy, that it won't function properly. And then, of course, the effects of that are ripple outward, right? That's the great leap forward that led to the famine that killed, what was it, 50, 60 million Chinese people. Same thing happened when they did dekulakization in the Soviet Union, and 6 million Ukrainians starved to death between 1933 and 1935.
Yep. And don't forget the Khmer Rouge. They had their own issues too. So we'll let that I don't know where we want to go with that. Because one of the things that kind of sticks out to me right now is the individual was heavily focused on in the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was significantly focused on. At some level, all of the Enlightenment centers all focused on the individual: the German, the French, the Scottish, and English Enlightenment. Because they were, in a way, using rationalization. And I don't want to just characterize the Enlightenment as anti-religion, because it wasn't.
No, it wasn't, because
actually,
along with the Enlightenment was the Renaissance, in a sense.
Well, hang on, that's 200 years prior. So Enlightenment was 1690 till about 1790.
That's right.
Because so just
the Enlightenment came on the heels of the Renaissance, in a sense.
Yes. So we'll just outline this really quick, right? So we have the Dark Ages.
Yeah, because we're getting into some history that's not within my realm of knowledge.
Yeah, that's fine. But we can have that. So we have the Middle Ages, right? And I don't want to call it the Dark Ages, because that's actually a characterization by a guy named Plutarch, I want to say his name was. And he was actually and it was in the Renaissance, and he was dealing with the plague and all that other fun stuff, right? So we have that, and then we have the Renaissance kind of start to happen in Italy. And Italy is the epicenter of the Renaissance in many ways. You have Charlemagne and the keeping of the Holy Roman Empire, and a few other things happening, right? And so you have the Renaissance, then you have the Protestant Reformation, which then kind of leads to like depravity, a few other things. So like your Renaissance is calling back to these ideas that we see again associated with Aristotle, Plato, all of those things, right? Classical education, trying to find God through like painting, right? And stuff like that. And of course, there's a sensibilities aspect, and the Catholic Church is dominant during this time frame. Then you have the Reformation, which begins, around 1500 or so with Martin Luther. Significant event because it splits Europe. It also starts to talk about like the word, people reading the books. Depravity is a huge concept, like within Calvinism. And I mean, it leads to a lot of different discussions. And then kind of out of that, you have the religious wars in the early 1600s. Very rarely do I use religion in war. You can still characterize these wars, like the 30 Years' War and these other wars, Cromwell's Civil War. That's the English Civil War. Some of these wars as, religiously motivated, that's fine, but it's also politically motivated as well. So whatever.
Well, I mean, in those times, if I remember correctly, a lot of the kings were ordained to have been put there by God, divine providence
Yeah.
themselves. So that's the root. That, I guess, this is where I was getting things kind of confused about the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and the idea of the individual is the idea that kings were ordained by God. In a sense. So there's an idea of this divine connection between say the ideal or God, whatever you want to put it, the ideal or God, in direct line to the king. So that's
so you have the divine monarchies are definitely here, and they're supported by the church, and so you see the partnership, and then you see Reformation happen, and the Catholic authority.
It seems at some point in the Enlightenment is where that idea gets carried even further from being just the divine of the monarch to the divinity of the individual. There's a shared divinity among individuals at some point. I'm not exactly sure where that idea kind of.
So it's actually in a few different localities, right? So if we look at the rise of the individual, you're talking about like Voltaire, Kant, Locke, major characters there.
Yeah. Kant and Locke are considered two of the best early psychologists of the Enlightenment period, because they didn't, and the reason why they're lumped in with psychology is because, oh God, I can't remember right off the top of my head, but I know Locke is considered the father of liberalism, and he's one of the ones that was a big proponent of the idea of the divine individual.
Well, yeah, because that comes from his essay of Human Understanding, early 1700s or so. And there's that, and then you have Kant's critiques of reason, justice, like all these critiques, right? And I'm not going to pretend that I know them, but he saw the Enlightenment as, the ability to speak up for oneself, almost, right? To be able to boldly go where others, do not. And you also have Voltaire, right? Voltaire is a force in the Enlightenment. And let's not forget the scientific revolution that's going on in this time frame too, because you have Newton that's coming out, all that fun stuff. So science is being pushed. Cartesian break has occurred, all that fun stuff. And so, the Enlightenment occurs after the Civil War, after the not the Civil War, but after the religious wars, and they're all located, right? So you have France, Germany, and England, or England, Scotland. And you start to see these people kind of start to challenge these things. And on one side, you definitely have an individual, and on the other side, you have, I'm not mistaken, Hobbes actually in Leviathan advocates for absolute monarchies of sorts, right? And keep in mind, even these absolute monarchies are open to rationalization and to self-improvement. Not Russia, but some sources look at Germany as a really interesting example as far as consolidation and improvements and stuff like that go. Granted, everybody was hungry for power and stuff like that too, so you have that to contend with. But the idea here is the individuals, and then you also have the idea of you need betters that are coming up, that are starting to bubble up. And that's kind of captured in Hobbes. You see not necessarily the better movement within Locke or within the Scottish Enlightenment. You see more of the individual self-interest, stuff like that, kind of coming up through Mandeville, the Fable of the Beast, so on and so forth. And then you also have Rousseau in France, right? And we have to pay attention to these things, because these things do come to an interesting head in the late 1700s.
Oh yeah, because Rousseau's ideas are what fundamentally led to the formation of it was something along the lines of the Department of Public Safety. I think.
Department of Public Safety is spot on, and that's the.
Okay, I couldn't remember exactly what it was called, but that was the idea of equality and brotherhood and all of this stuff. And it was So it was almost like a precursor to Marx in a sense.
Yes, and a lot of people
I
actually
don't.
draw from Rousseau. A lot of the socialists, social thinkers
Mhm.
draw from Rousseau, and he favored more of a democracy.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's funny where Rousseau, like any thinker outside of Marx, it always goes to Hegel, but Rousseau, it was his ideas of brotherhood, equality,
Yeah.
and
Well,
of
it's
course
Hegel because if I'm not mistaken, because of the dialectic process.
yes, the diet.
But you can go further to that back because there's not a whole lot new under the sun, right? There's something new
No,
under the sun, and go all the way back to Plato for a dialectic. I
yeah,
mean, I don't need to contribute that to Hegel.
no. But what I'm getting at is, okay, is your, even if they don't know it, they do pull from Rousseau. It's kind of like the
Yeah.
idea that the people that embody the postmodernist philosophy, that embody it, don't know all the intricacies and ins and outs of the philosophy to embody it.
Mhm.
It's only when you see a whole group of whether they're protesters, social justice warriors, whatever you want to call them,
Mhm.
it's when you get a bunch of them together that you start to see the philosophy come together and act itself out through their
Yes.
embodied action. And it's
Yes.
the same thing that they get that from Rousseau, because Rousseau is considered a postmodern philosopher in a sense too. It's not just, everybody just points to the French intellectuals of the 60s, Derrida and Foucault, but I mean their ideas go back to Marx and Hegel and Rousseau.
Yeah.
But it was Maximilian Robespierre who would cite Rousseau while they were taking people to get their bloody heads chopped off.
Yeah, and not only that, but like you start to see. I don't want to characterize the Enlightenment that it came to a head with the French and American revolutions, right? I don't think that's an appropriate
No,
climax.
no. The climax is that the Enlightenment kind of took to the Renaissance idea of the divine monarch. The Enlightenment was not only the idea of the divinity of the individual through Locke, but that's where rationality and reason really started kind of taking off. And this is where a lot of the proto psychologists really started to come to the forefront with Locke. For example, he thought that experience was the sole nature of experience for human beings and knowledge.
Mhm.
Therefore, the idea of the blank slate that just won't go away for whatever bloody
Yeah.
reason it is, that's been debunked. And Steven Pinker laid that out in his book, The Blank Slate, that no, we're not blank slates.
Exactly, and I mean, there's that. We also, the world, we write on the world, and the world writes on us.
Yeah,
So there's
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Well, oddly enough, you have with the Enlightenment, and this is what I think it's interesting. You have this emphasis on self interest, right, in more ways than one, and you see that happen with the American Revolution, and you also not. I think, contrary to popular belief, the Americans were more educated, or at least read more, or
Yeah.
something to that effect. And that's why the revolution was so well. I mean, if not, you wouldn't have Alexander Hamilton writing 100 essays. It's not 100, it's like 80 something, right?
Yeah.
For the Federalist.
Or Thomas Jefferson. I mean, he was 20 something years old when he wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
These
so
were these were young intellectual guys. They were not, and a lot of people seem to think that, the oversimplification is that it was, no, we were pissed off that we were paying taxes without having representation in parliament, but that was only one small part of the problem. Many people wanted to remain subjects of the British Empire. There was just a lot of screwing people over because they weren't part of the mainland British that was causing a lot of problems.
Yeah, and then on top of that, it boils down to how do you govern something that's 3,000 miles away under the current technological conditions, right? And it just wasn't feasible, and so you have people doing that, and then like the American Revolution happens, and we also, at the same time the American Revolution happens, we have a culmination of political economy coming out too, right? Backgrounded off of theory of moral sentiments in 1754. So because Smith published Theory of Moral Sentiment in 1754, heavily influenced by Locke and others, and then he published Wealth of Nations in 1776. And that's a kind of like a culmination of those things. And you start to see this idea kind of start to come to fruition from England to the Americas. And then we start to get into some other, like into other stuff. So like political economy, we'll say it, the father of capitalism kind of comes out to play. While you have on the mainland in Europe, in the European mainland, you have people like Turgot, people who believe like agriculture is like the primary driver. You have the divine monarchy colliding more or less with democracy, right? Because if we put Hobbes and Rousseau together, that I think is what happens.
Yeah, and well, I mean that's their. If you take Hobbes and you take Rousseau and you put them together, you do get the whole picture. That's the hero and the adversary right there.
Yeah.
In the Enlightenment, because Rousseau thought that people were inherently good. It was society that corrupt. So that's the idea of the noble savage, and I'm pretty sure somebody somewhere is going to have something to say about that. But that's what Rousseau called it. And then you had Hobbes, who thought that, well, it's society that makes humans good, but ultimately our nature is it's supposed to be people against other people, fighting for resources. And it's not a trivial thing.
It's
Thomas
a state of
Hobbes
nature and trust, and trust is kind of an undergirding idea here that we kind of see in the Enlightenment. And where you place that trust to be governed is indicative, right? Do I trust it in other people and we all share that, right? Or do I trust it in my betters or people who are educated in those matters, to be considered? And so I think we kind of characterize the Enlightenment, and the reason why it's really important is because we have cause and effect relationships, right? Like we see the Reformation, the Renaissance, all these things kind of go into the Enlightenment and set conditions. And then we also have, oddly enough, Romanticism. Romanticism is really an interesting idea, because in a way it is regressive, because
I don't want to oversimplify it, but for anybody that wouldn't understand Romanticism, it's almost like nostalgia, but in a much broader sense. It's wanting to go back to
a lot of ways, and it's also a rebuff against rationalism, right? Because we're emotional beings, right? So like, I mean, the sorrows of young Werther, I mean, we look at that and we go, oh man, poor Werther, right? Like really, he's a loser, because he prizes these emotions and he never wins Charlotte because of those things in a way. But the idea here is to focus on the emotions and the feelings associated with that. That's a romantic idea.
And this is kind of where Kant starts to emerge because of the critique of pure reason. And this is where he kind of goes into the ideas of categories in a sense.
Was Kant in the Romanticism? I know Kant was extremely involved with that 1804. Yeah, okay. So I mean, yeah, maybe so.
Kant lived to be into 1804, and he's considered one of the most difficult philosophers to understand because, well, first of all, he thought that true knowledge, while it does come from experience, it also isn't the mind's only source of knowledge.
Yes,
he's also the first one that knows that because you could think of it this way that so if we're going to look at this from, say, a psychological perspective, Kant believed that the mind was too subjective to have an a priori basis. However, because we've managed to expand our knowledge, this is simply not the case, and that we can use experimental models to measure phenomena in empirical ways. And this is where Kant's credit comes in about objects occupying different categories to lead to the conclusion that there's an infinite amount of ways to interpret the finite amount of phenomena. So in a way, Kant's kind of cottoned onto the same problem that you were talking about before we started recording when it came to artificial intelligence. And it's how do you narrow down the interpretations of certain phenomena to act in the world, because objects can occupy many categories because of how we comprehend of our experience. And so, and this is where he gets into the critique of pure reason, because, because of the state of gaining knowledge and that things occupy many different categories at a time, you can't know the sum total of all objects in all categories. There's no rational way to do this. And this is where he kind of really takes the rationalist to task on that.
Yes. And so, so Romanticism pretty much comes up on the heels of the Enlightenment, in a way rebuffs it, fights against the idea of pure reason and rationality. And in a way, it alludes to that nostalgic idea of chivalry, of connection with your work. So who else is heavily influenced by Romanticism?
Well, Karl Marx,
right? I mean, it's very evident in the Communist Manifesto, right? When he sits there and, even in Das Kapital later on, right? It's very apparent. And at about 1850, you have realism that comes into play, right? So like realism plays a role in this. And that's kind of captured with, the idea that not everybody is going to be a certain way. I mean, you see Germany begin to unify during this time frame, about 1871, after the Franco-Prussian War. Otto von Bismarck and his legacy on Germany are put down like realpolitik, right? And we see it as well in our art, because art is a very indicative of our, I would say, I think maybe let me know if I'm off here, of our collective unconscious.
No, I think that's a really good way of thinking about that, because you start to see these similar patterns emerge in different places, not just in Europe, but you also start to see it kind of manifest itself in the US and in Canada and other places too. So it's not a pattern. It's not a pattern that's constrained to one area. And if I'm not mistaken, even in Russia, in a sense, you start to kind of see this kind of start playing itself out there too, because this is about the time that you start to see the Duma start to kind of manifest itself. It's like a miniature parliament that's trying to, constrain the powers of the czar in a sense, but still speak to the agricultural peasants who had just been emancipated, as well as seeing the first manifestations of, say, industrial workers start to kind of manifest with the rail lines and everything as it was trying to come into play at the time too. So it's not constrained to just Central Europe. It's not constrained to just Germany. It's kind of start to see that kind of come over. And then of course you have as the Romantic era starts kind of coming into this, in a way that it is kind of nostalgic, because you start to see, well, the consequences of the Enlightenment, for example, is that you have you have the empiricists kind of moving forward. And this is where you start to kind of see psychology as a philosophy kind of morph into the beginnings of what would be considered a soft science in a sense.
Yeah.
Of course, it's kind of more like the birth of, it's where the alienists, which was the early version of psychiatry, which is kind of the beginnings of psychology, of morphing from, say, a philosophical endeavor into a more of a scientific type of endeavor. You have Wilhelm Wundt, who had the first experimental psychology lab. You've got William James that's running physiological experiments and trying to understand the mind-body connection as well. And so this is kind of where Nietzsche comes in and kind of says, wait a second here, you Enlightenment types with your reason and rationality, kind of start to take.
I mean, I would say he also critiques Romanticism very well too, because he's in the realistic era, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So I mean, he really is. He's kind of embodying the realistic notions, like especially like, again, I haven't read Genealogy of Morals, but the importance of our traditions and our customs and these religions, all right, and then we get into God is dead, and we get into other key things, and his wrestling with his personal notes on the will to power. And the reason why I say personal is because I don't think they were ever meant to be published. They were published at some point for some political gain.
Well, the will to power is just the will to power is an interesting book because it definitely influenced one of the psychoanalysts, Alfred Adler, because Adler thought about the will to power as personal competence and dominance of one's will. That we weren't just going to be as Freud thought, we were the sum total results of our impulses and drives. That's what human beings were. And so if everything worked well and you came from a really good environment and you had your drives under control, then you are less likely to suffer from any given type of neurosis or hysteria. Adler thought that people just strive for competence, and therefore, the work to getting their drives and stuff kept intact. And so, but for Nietzsche, the idea of the will to power was, well, one, how you create your own values after the death of God. Because it's not just in the will to power, but in Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche looks at, if we're going to knock out the cornerstone of our culture, because we do come from this religious thinking, and that's the idea of the death of God, right? It's not so much God is dead, yay, we're free from religious dogma and superstition. It's the death of God is, well, we've basically taken out our ideal, our collective ideal. You could look at God from a Freudian perspective as, say, the collective ego, the collective superego, excuse me. So without the collective superego, you have to kind of create your own values, but it's not obvious that human beings can do that because human beings have been using the same traditional senses for thousands of years, and it's worked out pretty well for human beings thus far, all things considered.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and it's very difficult for us to create new values, and I think to kind of continue the story, I think there's after realism, it's captured by, and again, a book that I don't quite remember, but it's from a German author, and it's written in the early 1900s, and it's about a kid who's in boarding school, and it's very Lord of the Fliesy. In some regards, but there's a passage that kind of always stuck out with me, and that was, we used to be able to build bridges, and those bridges were concrete, right? We could build them between 2 points, but now with imaginary numbers, how do I do that, right? Because imaginary numbers, they're imaginary, and those exist in mathematics, and so it was very difficult for him to wrap his head around that. And that was an example. And that would be something that would lead later into the Weimar Republic and stuff like that. And idealistic, I would say after the Great War, there was a very idealistic thing that happened, or maybe during that time frame, because I don't think the Bolsheviks would have had enough headway if there wasn't enough idealism there either. Right.
Oh, no. Idealism and this idea that, well, we know what's best and we're going to go with what's best, and
there's that too, but then you also have like Woodrow Wilson, and what is it, the 14 points or something like that after the war. I mean, you have multiple things that are occurring, and then we're forced to reckon with, finally, I think, the manifestation of very hostile brothers today, right? And that is and this is something that I think maybe it's the right time to kind of pull this in, is we're both fighting, both sides are fighting what we think is the demon of that side.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, the left will say fascism all day, every day. The left will sit there and say fascism. And oddly enough,
or Nazism, they'll point to either one of those, because it's not obvious to me what it is that they're referring to when it comes to fascism, because fascism, as I understand it, is a philosophy that could actually be mistaken for left turn, for far left authoritarianism in a sense, because it's the idea of the belonging to the state.
Yes, and so like that idea that fascism happens, German fascism, definitions do matter, but we also have to have enough ambiguity to kind of operate in. And
I think that the ambiguity, I think, is the danger that lies in this, right? Because
it's the unknown. Yeah.
Well, it's not only just the unknown, but it's like, from what I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I've only been studying totalitarianism for 2.5 years. I'm nowhere near an expert for it. But fascism, to me, it's you have a state. So let's look at Italy. They were a truly fascistic state. Same thing with Spain, right? Those who lived in Spain and those who lived in Italy as Italians, they were bounded by the Italian or the Spanish state with a ultra nationalistic thing, right? The state of Italy, the state of Spain, you're Italians, you're Spanish. Spanish belong to the state of Spain. The Italians belong to the state of Italy, and it's predicated on that ethnic thing, but it's not so much a superiority thing. It's just that you are belonged by the state of your ethnicity, something like that. With forcible suppression of opposition and strong regimentation of society and of the economy and everything that kind of comes along with that. It kind of sounds like communism in a sense, except for the nationalist aspect.
It has an ethno vibe to it.
It does have an ethno vibe to it. I think
that's a good indicator of what fascism would look like.
Whereas Nazism, it's in the blood. That's where the idea of blood and soil are connected together. Germany isn't Germany as a state. It's Germany belongs to the blood in conjunction with the state. So it's got this weird mystical thing to it. And so it's superiority. That's where the superiority claims came from, is they believed that the German blood was superior to all other blood. Because the Italians weren't like that. Neither were the Spanish. It wasn't about the blood, and it wasn't about Italian superiority over any other European. It's the same thing with Spain. It was just, Spanish identitarianism, but not superiority. The Nazis were, not only was it like German ethnic nationalization, but it was German superiority over other Europeans. And that's what justified the behavior, was their superiority. Whereas Italy and Spain, they were just, they belonged to the state based on their ethnicity, but it wasn't like superiority claims, which is kind of fascinating. And I think that detail matters.
Well, what's also fascinating too is the left will pull experience from Spain. Like, I've heard multiple like left-leaning people pull the Spanish as a shining example, and I just find that funny. Of their form of government, of socialism,
under Franco.
Yeah, like under the during the Spanish Civil War and all in Spain.
I have to say that Francisco Franco was not necessarily one of the better people out of.
I'm not going to sit here and
no, but I find that fascinating that's what they point.
Yeah. I've had a lot of conversations and they point to Spain, and I'm like, Spain was just as bad. So
Spain was a fascist country at least until 1975 when Francisco Franco died. But it wasn't Spanish superiority. It wasn't Italian superiority. It was the Nazis were the superior ones. They were the Übermensch. They were the Aryan race. They were the European.
The will to power.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly, and that was what I alluded to earlier.
Well, that was Nietzsche's sister's.
Yep, that was all Nietzsche's
sister.
Yeah. But one of the things that so when we look at World War II, right? Because I think World War II is one of the most pivotal moments in the 20th century, hands down. Like, I mean, not a lot of people are going to sit there and dispute that, but it is so ingrained in us that fascism has to be fought first, and that's what happened.
Well,
Fascism was fought first.
Well, fair enough. It has to be because, but then again, the definitions matter, because if we're talking about like fascism, like traditional fascism, I would put that on equal footing with say
I would
communism.
too, but
I would say that the reason why Nazism is worse is because of the systematic destruction of other races in the name of ethnic superiority.
Yeah, and so maybe they're equivocating the two terms, right? And I mean, both I think can be disastrous.
Oh, absolutely. It can all. I mean, anytime that you have a utilitarian anytime you see a utilitarianization of a government that becomes a one-party state, and it's predicated on basically this point of view is the sum total of all point of views, and no other point of view is allowed, to the point where you see political repression and murder and all of that take place. But it's the aims that I think is what fascinates me, is because if you look at, say, communist doctrine or Marxist doctrine in particular, when you say we want everybody to be equal, it doesn't give you the same nauseous feeling than if someone says, well, we're this and we're better and we're going to win because of our superiority.
Yeah, and so and well, if you don't mind hanging on just 1 second, and that's an important point that I want to get into.
Okay.
So we see America, right, which I think is, maybe I'll give credit to Dr. Wolf a little bit. He's a leading communist professor, heavily involved with Marxism.
Yeah, I've seen videos where people have been wanting to see Wolf and Jordan Peterson have at it.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
I'm just saying that's after the Slavoj Zizek
that was an interesting
discussion. People wanted to see Wolf and Peterson have at it.
Well, the issue here is, right, so America at that time frame was, I would say, it was incredibly socialistic in a way, right? Because it had to contract a lot of things and like circle the wagons and focus on some of the collectivism, because it had a 25% unemployment rate. I mean, we were going through some stuff, right, in government programs and stuff.
So, are we
that.
talking about under Roosevelt's presidency?
Yes.
Okay. So I have from my understanding of history, because I've gotten into some arguments with some ultra conservatives. They call FDR socialist, and I'd say, well, I wouldn't go that far with it, because a lot of the measures that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was putting in, while yes, they were vastly increasing the social safety nets and all of that, I want to say within the context of the Great Depression, and especially with the Dust Bowl being an ecological disaster that happened concurrently with that, it was, we have to try to do what's going to work to pull people out of this pit of despair of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. And these weren't meant to be permanent measures by any stretch of the imagination. I thought they were supposed to be temporary, or at least that was the intention. But after Roosevelt died, and oh God, what the hell was his name that took over after
Truman?
Roosevelt died? Truman. I want to say it was through Truman, and those after him kind of kept those things in place that were supposed to be temporary. So it's kind of like that idea of unintended consequences.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different idea in many ways.
I mean, I wouldn't call FDR like a card carrying Marxist.
No, I wouldn't either.
No,
I wouldn't either. And I would just say the political climate of the time was different, right? And I think Richard Wolff his heuristics and biases are very strongly towards the socialist side, like that. Now, we fight fascism first and actually choose to ally ourselves with communism and socialism by extension. Of course, people can get here and say, well, it's not socialism, whatever. Apparently there's no real socialism ever.
That wasn't real Marxism.
It was never real. I mean, whatever. So then our entire makeup shifts. We are fighting a Cold War now, with like right on the heels of fighting fascism, and that war lasts about 40 years.
Well, it
right?
depends. It depends on what you mean by the Cold War and fight, because we fought several. There was some hot conflicts within the broader.
There are proxy wars.
Well,
I mean, there were
Vietnam,
proxy fights.
Korea, the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of that. Those were all smaller manifestations of I would say, even though we're not calling things like Vietnam and Korea small, they were not.
I mean, they were manifestations of conflict, but overall,
they were the manifestations of I would say that they were the manifestations of the containment politics of trying to contain those ideas to where to China and the Soviet Union, and that they wouldn't spread elsewhere. Obviously, that failed miserably.
Yes,
because you have Cuba, you have Congo, you have there's North Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia. So those ideas kind of spread. Laos, those ideas spread very, very rapidly.
Yes, and so that was what the Cold War was in many ways, right? It was that, and it was combined with an American malaise. So there's some things going on there, and then America essentially decided to, hey, we're going to fight communism, right? Like, we are fighting communism, and we develop on the right, the conservative right, is effectively a religious zeal associated with capitalism.
That's because of what came out of the Soviet Union was they were an atheistic state. So
like, I mean, from a religious perspective, yes, like it was Christianity becomes associated with
America, Americanism becomes construed with Christianity, which was good, which went against what we called essentially, and when I say we, I mean the American people at the time called it a godless state, a godless evil empire. If I'm quoting Ronald Reagan correctly, it was an evil empire and a godless state. And that is the religious right, and the religion, and it became very much ossified and tyrannical in a sense, because of that you had the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, because that's only 30 years removed from the end of the Second World War.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of things kind of going on with that, and America is going through this phase, right?
Yeah, it's going through this transformation in a sense.
Communism is defeated. And
it depends on how you're telling the story, because you could say that communism.
I'm telling the story as the USSR, as the embodiment of communism. Because
what I mean by defeated is because it became apparent that system could no longer be sustainable. Something went wrong within the Soviet Union. It wasn't so much that we defeated the Soviet Union and communism collapsed. It was because when a system ossifies, it can only be ossified for so long before it undergoes a transformation. In the sense that what we're seeing today in the United States is again that chaotic transformation after the ossification of the religious right of the 70s and the 80s. Well, the communist state ossified so much to the point that it was considered unsustainable, and you get somebody free thinking like Mikhail Gorbachev, who was like, okay, well, we need to westernize to a certain degree because this isn't sustainable. But they made too many rapid transformations that allowed the communist state to collapse. And that's exactly what it did.
Well, yes, and I would also sit here and say that music and a few other things that were previously banned or only used towards aligning their social values, like because if I'm not mistaken, in the 70s and 80s and stuff like that, restrictions were limited. I know, especially in East Germany, they were lifted. And so you started having more like music and stuff like that.
Perestroika.
Yep. And so like there's that, and so you have it's less geared towards the Soviet, all that artwork that Jordan Peterson keeps in his house. It's all propaganda.
Well, yeah, the landscape of the Soviet Union transformed. I mean, one of the biggest events culturally, if you want to talk about with perestroika and the westernization of Russia, was it happened right there in the early 90s, right before the collapse. I mean, Metallica and a few other bands played at the Russian airfield there. I mean, this is kind of where people kind of at first got the courage, because you also had like the KGB and the Red Army were kind of there acting as security. And here you have this strange alien cultural thing coming into your country. And then the next thing you know, guards are fighting with the concert goers, and the concert goers aren't stopping.
Yes.
They kind of get in, they continue to fight the guards, and then eventually the guards kind of integrate into the crowd in a sense. And this enculturalization along with perestroika was what led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. I mean, it's like dominoes, right? One domino tips the other one. So you have, you have, of course, Solzhenitsyn, kind of Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, the Gulag Archipelago. The West kind of wakes up to what the hell's going on over there. We start to, instead of going against the Iron Curtain, as they called it, we start saying, okay, well, you have the transformation because Stalin dies. You have de-Stalinization with Gorbachev. Khrushchev comes in after Stalin, and in de-Stalinization, trying to, undo the cult of personality surrounding Stalin. And then things kind of start to wobble, and so they get another person in after Khrushchev, and then things kind of clamp down again. This is kind of where you start to see that the what the hell were they called in West Germany or Eastern Germany?
Stasi.
Yeah, that's where they start really ramping up. Is the Stasi starts ramping up and arresting people and all this stuff, and you start to see this along with the KGB. That's when
churches are open too.
And
East Germany churches are open.
Yep, and then you kind of start
the safe space.
Yeah, and then you start to see some of the defections really start to happen, like Yuri Bezmenov, who immigrated to India and then Canada in the 70s and 80s. Then after whoever it was that was after Khrushchev, after he leaves, then you get Mikhail Gorbachev in, and he starts, relations with the Western world and really starts to westernize under perestroika, trying to reinvigorate the Soviet system because he sees it ossified and things aren't going to go so well. And then ultimately it collapses. The whole damn thing collapses in on itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of that, you also have other experiments in socialist frameworks occur in Western Europe. So the one that I would point to is the Nordic countries, right? The Baltic states. They go in through a phase of socialist experimentation. Now, they classify themselves like a social democracy or whatnot, but those failed. They failed by the mid 80s.
Yeah.
And I guess the point being here is the right today fights an imaginary enemy or the shadow of socialism and communism, right? While the left fights the shadow of the right, which is fascism or Nazism.
Well, I would say that analysis is correct, and it's incorrect at the same time.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is the left has failed to acknowledge its own shadow. According to the left, there is no socialist and communist. There's no evil manifestation of the excesses of the left. It doesn't exist as far as they're concerned.
To be very maybe this is too pointed, right? I equate the left and their unacknowledgement of their shadow to a Christian apologetic saying that the slavery in the Bible was good.
I will agree with you on that one.
And that's just what I see. It's the same level of just cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I've noticed with conservatives and the right is that they acknowledge that the white nationalists and the Nazis and the fascists within their side of the political distribution, they acknowledge they exist and they deny them voice. conservatives do a really good job of distancing themselves from those that need to go bye-bye.
Yeah. So here's maybe let me put on my leftist shoes here and let me know if I'm off. So while I agree with you, I think there's an issue associated with Trump, right?
There is.
Because what Trump does or did, and does, is he is tapping into an idea too, a romantic idea. But both sides are doing this, by the way.
Yeah.
And that romantic idea is America was great during this time frame, right? And then that's when the left like goes, oh no, that's it. That's the ethno-national, because you're talking like America was great. Well, all these other people were minorities, were persecuted, all this other fun stuff. And then that is the point. Like, well, that is the
to give the devil their due.
Yes,
because this is important. Trump has this terrible ability of not being he has this magical he has a superpower, right? Like if you were to lay out every yard, like every rake you own, or every rake in your town, in your backyard, Trump would step on every single fucking one of them. Excuse my language, but it's true. He would step on every single rake, because there is an idea that during the heyday of American glory, there are some things that were good that we probably should reintegrate into. So from a Jungian perspective, we should reintegrate those things into the individual aspects of society, into the country. And so the idea is like the family, father, mother, two parents in the household, the valuing of relationships, because relationships are more transactional today amongst young people than what they were 20, 30 years ago, or even back then.
I would say that's a very, that is a symptom of technology as well.
It is because well, I mean, Jordan Peterson and Rob Henderson were talking about this with, the idea of, well, pornography is extremely available through technology. So it's almost like it's almost polyamory by proxy, right? You have all these different partners that you could have a virtual experience with that could stand in for the real thing. So the relationships are kind of broken down, and postmodern feminism also has to take some responsibility for the breakdown of relationships between men and women.
Yes.
So the idea of the family, the idea of if you work hard, you can get what you want. And people say, oh, well, that's not true anymore. Well, no, actually it is true. You just have to be oriented properly to get what you want. It might be more difficult today than say it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. But again, how much of that is because we've, as Jonathan Haidt has put out, because of the preparing the road for the child and not preparing the child for the road, how much is it that we haven't prepared people for orienting themselves properly and having to make the proper sacrifices to get what it is they want? And how much of it also has to do with technological advancement, because as technology advances, a lot of the older ways to make a living, those things have disappeared. Andrew Yang has brought a very good point with automation and that taking the places of some jobs that were needed. And plus the time we're in right now, due to the technology, it's not obvious. It's not obvious to me what the effects are going to be once the pandemic is considered overdone and closed. What are the consequences? What are the consequences? Because everybody's working from home. There's going to be all new job opportunities are going to be laid out for people who want to work from home because they're afraid to go out into the world. So we don't know what the consequences of that is going to be, say 5 or 10 years from now.
Oh yeah. So it could also be rise to authoritarianism too.
Well, it has led to authoritarianism, and not just in America. And see, this is the thing that Jordan was warning against, and this kind of goes back to how you should act in the world, right? How should we act in the world so that authoritarianism and totalitarianism does not manifest? And one of the problems is, and Jordan talked to the guy that wrote about disease, parasite stress, disease prevalence in populations and totalitarianism in response to that. And we have seen authoritarianism, and it first manifested itself at the individual level in society, and then it's permeated beyond that, right? So
Yeah.
now,
Hang on. So let's just pump the brakes because this is still heavily integrated into our ideas, right? Like into this hostile relationship that we have between two brothers of the same, of the same mother. In which case, you have the right that embodies is fighting against the shadow of the left that's fighting the shadow of the right, and they're both willing to be authoritarian to some point to achieve their ends. That's the, I think, is, I don't know if that's the paradox or the oxymoron.
I think it,
Wow.
well, I think it is a paradox because here's the thing that's really interesting about that is the right isn't so much authoritarianism bearing its authority down on other people, but what they'll do is they'll they have already taken a totalitarian presupposition that whatever the left does, we have to do the opposite of.
Well, yes, but what I will sit here and say is the right actually is the one who censored first, right?
Oh yeah, they have, and now the left is doing that.
And the left is doing that, and the left and the right are both trying to do that in some regard, right? And so they're both fighting this fight, and we're both willing to sacrifice certain things, right? And where I think they both go wrong is they both have a romanticized notion. Here's that word, romanticism again, right? That romanticized notion of their ideas. That the right is better than the left is better than the right. Well, and that gets into, the next stage, right? Social welfare economics starts to really show its face in the 40s, the 30s and 40s. Okay. The Austrian school of wealth does have some, that was established in 1890. That has some interesting ideas to it because, wealth is infinite based off of value, not based off of resources. Right. And so you have some serious questions to ask because, and oddly enough, even under a capitalist system created by Smith, free markets, right, still don't exist. No, like someone who says they believe in free markets, they don't understand free markets, right? There's no such thing as a free market. Actually, the closest free market that exists is Uber, believe it or not. And so the thing here is we can't look back. Instead, we have to look forward. And if done correctly, right, this may be like the little socialist in me. So maybe everybody needs to bookmark this. Jim sounds like a socialist. The only way we can achieve like UBI or something like that, or a social safety net to the certain level, is to keep competitive markets and still drive for surpluses in other sectors of the economy. Like, because that's the only way you're going to make that happen. And I mean, surpluses, it can be value based, it can be resource based, it doesn't matter. Because if you don't do that, you're effectively creating a central planning apparatus. And that central planning apparatus leads to authoritarianism.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Either it's owned by the state or it's owned by corporatism. Like, doesn't matter, right? So if you lose competitive markets, and this is the actual Scandinavian model, right, is they have a great social safety net. Now, granted, their education's not like tier 1 education, right? It's not. Unfortunately, we still take the world in that with our Ivy League schools.
Well, I would say Japan also has a advantage on that, but that's because
Japan has a completely different issue too, based off of my limited understanding of that one.
Well, I know that they do year-round school, and I know that they're very, very, that they cultivate conscientiousness and they cultivate success.
Well, yes, they do that. And well, just real quick, just want to make sure I get this thought out. Like, Yang is right to a point, because automation will change the game, but we don't know how value will change. And if people can still generate value on like YouTube or something like that, right? Because everything else is rapidly changing. Now, does this mean that me as a business, as things get automated, I can't have a bunch of robots, right? I can't be just because they automate the trucking industry, for example, doesn't mean that I can't have a bunch of automated trucks traveling down the road, right? And I own that business. There's nothing that stops that. I still need mechanics. I still need carpenters, and these are the trades, right? And that's a whole nother issue from an education perspective, because for so long we push go to college, go to college, go to college, and now we're reaping the benefits of that. And what I mean by the benefits or the outcomes, the consequences are we have a severe shortage in the trades, and that hurts us.
And a surplus of people that are academically inclined.
But that surplus is the wrong type of surplus, because that surplus just at some level it creates resentment. And
it does, because you have so many academics and so many different departments that the quality of education gets diluted. Like you said, you get a bunch of resentful people, and so then they'll push that out, because I mean, being a college professor doesn't pay that much. And you can get resentful of that because there are people that are more valuable, that do more things of value, that people are willing to pay higher for. See, that's the thing that people don't seem to understand is what is it that you give, and how valuable is it? Right.
Yes, and that's where the value proposition comes in. You have infinite value because you can do things that even though you have limited resources, I can consult on a process improvement. I can do all these other things. That's why the critique that's associated with resources just kind of falls short, because I can do other things with those things. And what I want to.
And that's what makes creativity so hard to monetize too.
Oh, well, the issue with creativity is it turns into imitation.
Well, I mean, creativity is also hard to monetize, because if you make something that's new, it's not obvious how valuable it's going to be, how much that new thing's going to be wanted. And then if you're a creative person, you don't like to be stuck in a box. And so let's say it's successful and you start a business, you don't know how to run the damn thing because you're off to the next idea.
Well, here's the thing, right? So if I create something, right, and like I'm the beginning of all this. So like, let's say the 4-chord song, right? That is the creation, because a lot of songs that are hit songs are 4-chord songs, right? And so I sit here and I create a methodology now, and like everybody, it sounds familiar. This sells, this imitates. Now, I'm not going to say it's an outright innovation or anything like that, because typically innovations are very like, while a free market through creative destruction does imitate and innovate better, I'd still rather have that than have something else that doesn't work.
No, I'm saying like artists, for example, it's not easy how you monetize art. Or some brand new thing like Tesla, for example. How long did it take before they actually got an electric car that was viable?
Well, that's still the thing that so you create this new idea, you have surplus or something like that, right? And you're able to do those things. Like that's the artist who maybe on the side, like he's his day job is some miserable corporate job.
That's right. You have to have something there that you can have to fall back on. But this is where it comes to the entrepreneurial types versus those who run companies, right? Open people who are highly creative and entrepreneurial, they start businesses. It's the conservative. It's the conservative. Yeah, and it's the conservatives that come in and they understand how to make a company work and how to make it function, and so they run the company for the entrepreneur, while the entrepreneur goes and works on a new idea, maybe within the same company. But the entrepreneurial type can't be constrained down to doing the same thing over and over, because they're not going to be happy.
Yes, to a point. I think I agree with you. And what I will say is the artist eventually becomes his own tyrannical master, because especially if he wants to sell things to a point, because he has to create a formula, and that formula is the same, and then other people imitate that formula, right? And then that sells too, and it creates a competition in that regard within the boundaries of that formula. And then you have an entrepreneur who comes in and disrupts that formula, takes off something else, which he may or may not be successful in. Typically he'll fail, right? and over time that has to be standardized.
Yeah, because we're seeing a variation of that right now between Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Elon Musk started working on the rocket technology for the privatization of space travel first, and then Bezos comes in, and he's already how many? It was what 2 or 3 years before Elon Musk actually had a functioning self-landing rocket that actually worked and didn't explode all over the place.
It was a few years ago.
And then now Bezos had William Shatner up in space on his own.
Well, and both are very different in their approaches too. And so,
but what I'm saying is Elon Musk set the standard, and it's easy to imitate now. That's all I'm saying is it's similar to what you were saying.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yep. And so now you're starting to see. I mean, that's what an entrepreneur does. It's the creative destruction in that regard. It like people will imitate, and this is one of the critiques that I ran into recently is that capitalism only imitates. Not necessarily. Capitalism under a competitive market is more likely to innovate regardless. Now, there's a lot of imitation, right? 80% of those things are going to be imitations, but then you have 20% of those people, right? Just using a basic Pareto that are going to fundamentally, what's going on?
I was asking if you were recording.
Yeah, we are.
Oh, sorry.
We can edit. What's up? Okay.
It's
No, Charlie, you can stay. Sorry about that.
Are you in trouble?
No, I'm not. Oh, I don't think so. So, I forgot where it was. I don't know where it was anymore.
Oh, we were talking about the
Capacity to innovate and versus imitate.
Yes, and how in capitalism
that seems to be a
imitation seems to be a constant.
Well, yeah, well, so is consumerism, and that's another idea too. And typically, people are savers. Like savers are more successful than spenders, and that's a problem in its own right.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we're getting a little bit heavy in the economic side of this, which is
we are, and
still fun.
This is where you're much more knowledgeable than I am. I have the base idea, and that's probably not sufficient for a conversation in economics. But
you're fine.
But it goes back to. But we're talking about the adversarial thing, and I guess you could say that there's the adversarial brothers kind of even manifest itself in the Musk and Bezos like space race kind of thing that's going on there.
Well, no, not between those two actually. I think it's those two represent something else, right? They represent in a way a hero.
And it's let's say the
woke left.
No, I was going more along the lines with like NASA. Because I remember what I'm getting is like I remember there was this video of I want to say it was that what the hell is his name? He was one of the ones that walked on the moon with Buzz Aldrin and all of them. He's the one that's still alive.
Armstrong?
Is Armstrong still alive, or is it one of the other ones?
I don't know, one of the astronauts. Okay.
But they had made a comment that Musk has no business in the space business at all.
That's not for him to say.
I know it's not for him to say, but it kind of sets up this government establishment for the space race, and then you have the civilians.
Exactly. So there's a way to look at that too, and I think that's also kind of spurred out of the left, right? Because the left has heavily critiqued the both of them.
Yeah.
Right. Like we have Jeff Bezos just went to space, and we have X number of people who are hungry and starving and all that other fun stuff. How is that a good? How is this a good thing? How is self-interest and this greed a good thing? And to a point, I think they have a decent critique, but then on top of that, I think their critique kind of just falls on deaf ears because poverty is a weird problem to tackle.
It is. It really is.
especially for their perspective, because wherever they go, that poverty seems to be worse. So I question that, or the wealth gap seems to get worse. So with that adversarial notion, you have the heroes in this regard. And of course, I'm pretty sure there's plenty of flack that you catch for this one. The heroes, Musk and Bezos, and even what is it, the Virgin guy, Branson, something like that, whatever.
I'm not sure what his name is to be.
Yeah. So they're going off to space, pushing the final frontier, and Musk's mission is actually a very interesting one. His is all about the survival of the human species.
Yeah. I mean, that is a noble thing.
Mars as that.
Yeah, he's taking that on voluntarily of, okay, well, if we're not going to peak at 9 billion and then drop off, which I think COVID is actually going to do, is make things drop off. Because I mean,
only unless it mutates into something deadlier.
Which is what? Well, I mean, we're not even sure this thing's done, right?
No, it's not. It's staying around forever.
Well, what I mean is how much of an impact it's going to have. Like the bubonic plague is still around. Bubonic plague is still nasty. Either, as far as I know, there's no vaccine for it. And the bubonic plague has wiped out a lot of people in the 1300s. I mean, it made
bubonic plague also had a very high death rate too.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is like God, where am I going with this? The plague leveled out the human population. There was a lot of it took a significant chunk of the human population out.
Yeah, not around the world, because some say that it came from China first. It was in China first, and then it migrated effectively.
Yeah, and it even made some second tour stops in some countries. Like I think England dealt with it twice, or maybe.
Well, I mean, they all, like Europe dealt with it multiple times, all the way up and through the 1800s.
Yeah.
The 1800s. And I don't think we developed an immunity with it, but we definitely developed
some better therapeutics to kind of help people not die from it as horribly as they did.
Yeah,
I mean, there's still remnants of the old Spanish influenza that still runs around from the 1920s. It's still around. So COVID is going to be around.
Yes.
The question is, how much damage is it going to do before we've got enough therapeutics and a better vaccine that's going to give as good immunity against it as natural immunity would be?
Well, yeah, and then you're also looking at like what the impacts of COVID are on our human psyche as well.
Oh, right? God. I'd say the human I would say our psyche. I'd say the mental hygiene of humanity is probably dipped down quite a bit.
Well, I mean, not only that, but it's also being exacerbated, right? It's being challenged, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. Probably more. I think it's still a good thing.
Well, yeah, it depends on what you mean by challenge. What you mean by being challenged, because one of the things that you find a lot of people that are on the extreme ends of things, they think that this is an existential crisis that's going to absolutely murder every single person. That's one extreme way of looking at it. Then there's another way of looking at it that, well, COVID is not a thing and that this is just a scam and it's just
yeah, well, that's not accurate. I mean, either side is
obviously it's not accurate. I agree with you. It's not accurate. The accurate way of looking at it is this. It's a novel virus that we don't understand very well. Our ways of making sense of things that we don't understand very well have become corrupt.
Yes, and that's because of the knowledge idea that we had that we mentioned earlier.
And if we can't make sense of things that we don't understand, how in the hell are we supposed to move forward? So, for example, I've been looking up the death rates at random, and that's where you take the little number and you divide it by the big number. So, for example, worldwide, this thing's killed 5 million people worldwide, and I think we've had over 240 some cases worldwide, confirmed cases. The death rate's only 2%. of the world's population. It's 2%. I've also looked at the stats for the state of Virginia and I think that's like 1.6% of the population of the state. So if something has that low of a death rate, right? Does it justify the draconian measures that are being used to supposedly keep it in a case?
Well,
Or
the
keep
issue
it under
is,
control?
and this is where I would have to, I guess, maybe jump into the defense of some of the draconian measures, is how it may have a low death rate, right? But it has a high chance for disruption.
Oh
of
yeah,
the law.
absolutely. But
If one person gets it, everybody's getting it in that room, typically speaking.
yes,
And
that's true.
that's the scary, that's kind of like the shadow scary part of all of this, right?
Oh, no
And I
doubt
think
about
that's
that.
driving a lot of that too.
Oh, no doubt about that. But here's also the thing too. If you're going to think about this, and this is where the rationality thing kind of comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
The vaccines are free. They're available. They're free. You can go get them if you want one.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to you. It's your choice. Depending on where you live and depending on where you work, you might be heavily coerced, which I don't agree with heavy coercion at all.
I think if it's a company, the company has that right.
They have the right to. That doesn't mean I have to agree with it.
Then you don't have to work there.
Exactly. So there's the choice thing there.
Mm-hmm.
But if we and see, therapeutics have been designed. Merck's got pills coming out. I think they're supposed to be FDA approved by the end of the month. I think I might have the timeline wrong. At what point do we say we can go back to pre-lockdown, renormalizing, being able to live your life the way you want to without any interference from anyone else, because we have these things available that can prevent it and that we can treat it?
So that's a difficult question to ask, because
it is a difficult question to ask,
because
but I think it is, but I don't think it's an unreasonable question to ask.
it's not unreasonable, but we also have to we have to be very careful on how we define normal, right? Because this idea is, again, it's, I'm very careful when people say like we can go back to normal. Okay, well, what does that mean, right? Because that's I guess that's what I mean by the challenge, right? Like, this COVID environment has fundamentally challenged the way we do everything, right? Now, it's a learning opportunity, right, for our species, in a way, for our species, right? Now, what comes of it, it will be interesting, because we're going to have to act these out as a collective.
Well, and we have examples of how it hasn't really worked out really well. Like right now, we can point to Australia and be like, maybe that's not the best way.
No. I'm just talking on the whole. Like on the whole, we are reacting and trying our damnedest to figure out what looks good, what looks right. And of course, everybody's going to sit here and say Trump did a horrible job. This person did a horrible job. This person did, like, there
everybody,
are
no one country has gotten it right.
No, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't think so. Even if you have a low number of cases, I mean, that's a good indicator maybe of success. But even then, at what point did you shut everything down to meet that end state?
Yeah.
Right?
What I'm saying is, I think one of the things I think is a problem, and this goes back to the way we make sense of things, and that the way we make sense of things is broken. Is I think we've gotten so used to the idea of the U.S. as its own thing, and that it lies outside of the world in the sense that it doesn't exist in the world. It's the world in and of itself, in a sense, against other countries that might be considered the world at large, and yet the United States is.
I would say we're our own kingdom on a hill.
That's a better way of looking at it. I think I like that better.
Mm-hmm.
So the kingdom on the hill looks the way it does things and says, well, we're doing it right, or maybe we're doing it wrong, or some of us are doing it right and some of us are doing it wrong, but we haven't quite facilitated it and abstracted out of all the wrong what is the absolute wrong, and out of all the right what is the absolute right way of dealing with it. But we haven't really taken a serious look at the other countries that's dealt with it and take an honest assessment of how what they're doing is working versus how it's not working. And we haven't abstracted out a whole, okay, this is what we don't want to do, and maybe this is what we should do, or maybe we want to put this in the toolkit.
Well, the issue with that too comes down to like the propositions that we were talking about earlier too, right? How do we define success? And if we define success as the eradication of this disease, right? Then that means that is as harsh as it goes. Everybody's just gonna have to suck it up for, a 10-week period, right? Nothing will be open. Everybody stays home, as draconian as possible, right? That's an end state. We're gonna run into problems, right? Another end state could be, well, hey, we just need to maintain our economies, our way of life for the most part. Yeah, we can do without some things, but like we have to maintain these things in order that way we can all still survive and still promote, our self-interest or something like that, right? In that, I think how you define success is oddly enough based like almost on the political divide, right? And I say the left wants to eradicate it, right? But the problem is they can't do that because that goes against everything. And then the right says, well, hey, like let's maintain this, but then I don't think it's a death rate that's an issue. I think it's the fear associated that anybody can get it in a moment's notice.
And I guess the way I'm looking at it, and this is kind of a philosophical way of looking at it, is existentialism as far as what is an existential truth, right? So if COVID is going to be endemic to us, meaning it's not going to go anywhere, COVID is existentially true. That means that even if you're not going to get it now, you may not get it this year, you may not get it next year. At some point, you might come into contact with it and you might get it. And then it's 50-50. You might die, you might not. You might get sick, you might not. You might have moderate symptoms, you may have mild symptoms. It can go any number of different ways. The question is, what do you do about it?
Yes.
Do you live in fear? Or do you learn to live?
Yeah. Do you learn to live in the new environment and still go into, I think it's almost like two things here. Do I sit here and go off again the unknown and trying to, adventure, all these other things? Or do I just build walls up, right? And I'm going to embody this, the masculine versus the feminine, right? Do I embody the feminine right now, right? And what I mean by that is the homemaking. In this case, maybe I don't agree with Jordan that men are order in this example, right? But it's this idea of compassion and everybody coming together in this time of need and staying as a collective, but then the men can't go off and change new chaos or that chaos into order or something like that and like filter it in because it's too dangerous right now.
So you become an aspect of the tyrannical masculine. You build up the walls to keep the unknown out and keep the known in.
Yeah. And that's problematic.
It is, because that's only one half the story. That's the tyrannical male and say the benevolent of nature. It's the nurturing compassion aspect. That's kind of where this environmentalist story kind of goes. You have the systems that are tyrannical and they're basically raping the benefits of the nurturing great mother, and that humankind is not so much the hero but the adversary because they're working within the tyrannical system. That's how that's kind of playing itself out.
That brings to me a whole different string of ideas associated with that's very romantic as well.
It is, but they look at them great mother as nature in its benevolent form. The tyrannical king, that's the culture, is tyrannical. It's raping the benefit. It's raping Mother Nature, taking the benefits from, taking everything that nature has to give and hoarding for itself and its individuals and their evil nature that are allowing the system to continue doing what it's doing at the expense of the nurturing mother, at the expense of Earth.
Yeah, but and then what that does is it translates, and this is the economic side of this, it economically translates regressively and romantically to ideas of people self-sustaining themselves, right? Which is actually not helpful on, meeting surpluses and trying to, and trying to promote everybody's well-being, or like creating a better system where everybody's well-being is, because here's the thing, if I can only produce X amount, right, or I only produce enough for me, I'm doing everything for me. And there's very few division, there's not enough division of labor anymore that comes into play. And I just find the idea, I have to flesh this out a little bit more, a little bit.
But the idea of, okay, if because the idea for some is that this thing is a natural disease that just kind of popped out of nowhere. So it'd be a product of the great mother, of the benevolence of nature. And so when you say, do we build up the walls like the tyrannical king and let the walls become rigid and tyrannical to keep all of that out? So it's basically overprotective. It's the overprotective mother. It's the Oedipal. It's the Oedipal complex, in a sense of, we're going to protect the people at the cost of the people's own ability to be able to be and act in the world.
Yeah. And then and under the guise of environmentalism, because we also see this too.
Well, yeah, the first thing that happened with the initial lockdowns were people saying, "Oh, we should do this every 3 years so that way we can keep the planet sustainable if we keep everybody at home."
Yeah, I mean, it just turns into a huge environmental push in some regards. I mean, yes, it has benefits to the environment to some level, but
it doesn't do anything good for the human psyche or for humanity at all, because we are social creatures, and if we can't go out and do things, and you sit and you ruminate and you become miserable. Like, I mean, I've noticed my self-discipline when it came to like keeping myself in shape is kind of, I hate to say it, it's fallen off, because
you and me both, brother. You and me both.
So it's kind of like, well, it certainly hasn't been 100% good for people. I think we can agree with that.
Yeah. And so it opens under diseases, under environmental perceptions, under the idea of victimology, right? Or victimhood, right? We're capable of being authoritarian. And I would even say that it doesn't matter whether it's fascism, Nazism, or communism or socialism. The reason why is because part of becoming a dictator is effectively making a scapegoat. Like, you have to do that. You have to also tell a version of the truth, right? Or something to that effect. And so you have to isolate groups. So maybe from a fascistic side or an ethno side, I'm creating a narrative of people, right? And both sides are creating these narratives of people that are oppressed by a group of people, another group of people. It's the same. It's literally the same on both sides.
It's the oppressed versus the oppressor narrative.
Yeah, the criminal and the victim.
And so we're basically trying to portray the oppressor as the person that's responsible, or the person's responsible, and then we can justify any sort of action that we take because it's supposed to protect the oppressed from the oppressor.
Yes, exactly.
And then we run the danger of, then we have to get them before they come and get us.
Yes.
And that's where it becomes very, very dangerous, very, very quickly.
Yes, absolutely. And so like you have all of those things combined, you can do it, whatever, like even the oppressor could be people against the earth, right? And that's the crux of environmentalism.
Yeah, the idea that humans are a cancer on the planet and we're killing her slowly. So maybe it would be best if we didn't exist at all.
Exactly.
It's very easy how you can make that leap.
Yeah, it's very easy how you can do all those things. And so we start this process, and I think this is the interesting idea. Which of those processes is stronger? And I think the ethno process is stronger. Because
that's a problem.
yeah, it is a problem, but it is a stronger idea, because what it does, and maybe I'm way off here, but just all from my observation, right? Group of people, right, are typically going to be more tight knit than other groups of people, right? If you start to, and this is the intersectionality idea of this, right? If I start to look at groups of people and I say, ethnic versus income, or whatever categorization, right? the more you're connected to somebody is how somebody looks like you, typically speaking. Okay. And so that has a very strong force behind it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on how you want to. It depends on how you want to put your group together and how you want it to be held together. It depends on what the glue is, right? It could be based on class, it could be based on race, it could be based on sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, all of that. You're putting things together. It just depends on what the damn glue is, and you have to be bloody careful about the damn glue, because if you're going to go predicated upon race, then it becomes really easy, like you said, to scapegoat. And then it becomes,
really anything other than an overarching narrative, like
if you don't have something that unites every set of group, if you don't have something that unites all the groups of people under one shared idea, then things are going to come apart very, very rapidly. Is that pretty much where you're going with that?
Well, yes. And I would say the fascist is stronger, right? The ethno is stronger, and it builds itself up better, right? While the communist and socialist doesn't build itself the same way. Now, its audience can be broader. It's not ethno driven. It's income or something like that. But there's something about it that short circuits it, right? An ethno state like Germany grew relatively slowly, right? It was embedded and it was easily just something you can draw in the culture very quickly, right? But the problem here comes when you sit here and you look at, well, maybe the worker, right? I may be a worker, but I'm also an Aryan. Okay. Well, what is going to have the better pull? I think that's going to be the Aryanism, not the workerism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the ethno is the strongest tie.
And so something doesn't build itself up, right? And that's where I think the violence, and if we just use Germany as an example, right? The violence associated with this was still catastrophic, but it was slower to develop. It was very slow, right? Versus the socialist and communist, which is like, here's a revolution. And like everybody has to be on board with this revolution, right? Versus slowly.
And if you're not with it, then you're expendable, and we can do away with you very quickly. Which is exactly what happened. I mean, the Red Terror. I mean, the coup happened in 1917, and the Red Terror happened within a couple of years after the end of World War One. And I think that's a good place to stop. No, because it's about that time to stop. No, love to definitely try to come back to this one. It's definitely got me thinking.
Yeah, I think I was trying to get to that for a while, but I think we set the groundwork, we really had to set the groundwork to finally arrive at that conclusion.
Absolutely.
So hopefully that one.
I do. Thank you for agreeing to do this.
No, man. As always, happy to have conversations with you. I think you're the few people who I can do this with.
Well, I appreciate it. You have a good rest of your Sunday.
All right, man. Hey, no issues. And how's Christina feeling?
She's doing a little bit better today. I think it's just about the time to feed the dogs and everything, so I'm gonna do that. So,
well, hey, let me know if you need anything, and if you want to do, part two. This is definitely probably something titled part one.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
But hey, it was good. And you take care. Let me know if you need anything. If you ever want to talk.
Will do.
All right, later, man.
Later.